Virgin Galactic completed its 12th spaceflight and 7th commercial spaceflight over the weekend. And really, this is the capstone on the Unity program. The company's going to now move to the Delta class spacecraft. We're still almost 2 years out from that actually being a reality, potentially even a little bit more than that from that being a commercial reality. But this was a big step in the right direction. The flight's going to be a little bit different than past flights because we know that a couple of people skipped the line, basically paid extra to be on this flight instead of waiting 2+ years to get into those regularly scheduled commercial flights that'll begin sometime in 2026, hopefully. So I want to go through exactly what happened with this flight, what the payloads were. There was 4 passengers, and there was also some research payloads, so there will be some pretty significant revenue compared to some previous flights. But this now begins a waiting game for Virgin Galactic. It's going to be, like I said, 2+ years before we get to commercial operations. Some steps are being taken, advancing the Phoenix manufacturing facility. Test flights are going to begin next year, but there's not a lot that's going to happen. It's kind of a wild time for a stock like Virgin Galactic if you've been following this closely. So I'm going to dig into everything that we know today. My name is Travis Hoium. Thanks for watching Asymmetric Investing. Please subscribe here on YouTube for all my content, and thanks to this video sponsor, The Motley Fool. If you go to fool.com/ASYM, they'll give you their top 10 stocks to buy right now. Let's first start with the flight that happened over the weekend. This is the details of Galactic 7, the final commercial flight for VSS Unity. There were 4 astronauts, like I said, ranging from Italy, 2 from the US, and then 1 from the Turkish Space Agency as well. The flight carried what they call 2 autonomous rack-mounted payloads supporting NASA's Flight Opportunities Program, and was the 7th to carry microgravity and space-based research. This is actually a pretty important revenue stream for Virgin Galactic, something they've obviously only done a few times, but long-term there's potential to just add incremental revenue to each of their space flights. This is a little bit more on their research overview. Some of this was from the Turkish Space Agency. There was a project with Purdue University and also Berkeley, actually manufacturing some products while in microgravity. While Unity is now going to be basically mothballed, they're going to now move to the Delta class spacecraft. And this is actually what's really important for investors because this is the timeline. What you need to get to is commercial service. And this is the real challenge for Virgin Galactic right now because they have to get through finishing up design, building tooling, fabricating parts. They're kind of right here right now. The next step is going to be ground and flight testing. So ground testing is going to be happening relatively quickly, and assembly of the final Delta class spacecraft. You can see in their most recent earnings presentation, they gave some examples of finished parts. The thing with building this spacecraft is it's new, but a lot of things are old. The design is essentially the same as the Unity spacecraft. It's just much more optimized, and it's built to actually build multiple of these. So Unity was basically built by hand. This is going to be built with more standardized parts, so something that they can build over and over again, building efficiency in the process. This is where there's a ton of upside if Virgin Galactic can get this spacecraft off the ground. They have a newly designed interior. This is their facility in Phoenix where they're going to be actually assembling these. And a lot of the ground testing is going to be done on what they call the Iron Bird. So this is going to be testing all the forces that are involved. Do they meet the specs that designers expect? You're just in this verification process. So you've gone through designing the spacecraft. Now you're building parts. You're verifying that they work the way that you expected. Unity was actually a big piece of this. This is something that I think kind of gets lost, is that since the design is essentially the same, you know where a lot of the stresses are going to be on the spacecraft. You're not going into this completely blind. So a lot of the reason that you can have a 2-year time frame for building this spacecraft in particular is because you know exactly what you're looking for and what you're testing. So Iron Bird is going to be a big piece of actually accomplishing that. What's exciting is that when these get built, the economics will be absolutely tremendous. $600,000 is what they're now projecting on a per flight basis. Now, this is going to take a little while to get to a $600,000 seat number. Some of the people who are in line have ticket prices that are closer to $100,000. They were also selling tickets for $450,000 a year or two ago. So this number keeps creeping higher, which means that revenue per flight of $3.6 million is much higher than it previously was. They're looking at, with the 1 VMS Eve and 2 Deltas, the potential annual run rate of $450 million in revenue. Contribution margin, which is kind of like the cash flow that's coming from each individual flight going to be over 75%. So that should get them to profitability, at least get to the point where you can now start designing and building the second generation mothership. That's something that appears to be on hold right now. We'll maybe find out about that, more about that in the next year or two. The other change, and you can see this a little bit in this image, is there's going to be 6 seats. The Unity was actually designed for 6 seats, but the spacecraft itself is actually heavier than they anticipated, which is why they're only flying 4 passengers. So there's 2 pilots and 6 passengers on the Delta class spacecraft. So up a little bit from a capacity perspective from previous flights. The challenge in getting through the next 2 years is this right here, cash. As of the end of the first quarter of 2024, $867 million worth of cash on the balance sheet. Free cash flow was a negative $126 million. So you can see this amount of cash doesn't get you to the point where commercial operations are going to actually begin. We're going to expect cash burn to come down a little bit. What they're going to be doing is they're going to be spending more on capital expenditures and less on operations. So most of the operations in New Mexico that have been taking up a fair amount of money over the past year or two are actually going to come down and come to kind of a grinding halt until things ramp up again in 2026. Thanks to our friends at The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/ASYM for the top 10 stocks to buy right now. So what in the world do investors do now? Well, it's really just a waiting game for basically the next 2 years. There's a number of different milestones. I showed those earlier that Virgin Galactic is going to have to hit, and that's going to be the most important thing. But what I'm going to be watching is, do they hit those milestones on time? What are the deadlines that they're expecting to hit those milestones by? That's something they should outline a little bit more, I would expect, in the next conference call, the next presentation they give to investors, because cash is becoming a really big concern. If they continue to burn cash at the current burn rate, they're going to run out of cash right around 2 years from now. So that's right around the time that they're going to be expecting to launch that Delta class spacecraft into commercial operations. So they need to get to that point. That means they need to hit those milestones on time and not be delayed by a year or 2 years, the way that we've seen with some upgrades in the past. So no surprises for Virgin Galactic. That's really going to be the key. But as we get closer to that commercial operation launch, I talked a little bit about the economics. The economics are really positive. So if we do get, let's say, a year out from launch, now investors start thinking about, well, let's now look at what those cash flows maybe look like when we get to that launch point. What's the growth trajectory? It's a little bit easier to value the company a little bit more highly as the timeline gets shorter and shorter. So we're 2 years out right now. But don't be surprised if shares slowly move up if they continue to hit those timelines and eventually get to the point where management can raise the capital to do all the things they need to do to actually scale the business. There's a hotel that they want to build in New Mexico. They need to upgrade the mothership. They need to build another mothership. They need to build at least 2, if not 3 more spacecraft just for New Mexico. And then there's international expansion as well. So all these things are on the table. Don't have the cash to do it right now, but that's going to be the upside for investors long term. So we'll see how this all plays out. But continue following here on Asymmetric Investing, because I'll cover anything that is notable from Virgin Galactic over the next couple of years. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you here next time.